The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open, and every head turned to watch me enter. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing through the cavernous space like a countdown. I wore a simple red dress, fitted but professional, my natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. I carried a single leather briefcase, the same one I'd used 20 years ago when I first passed the bar. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer suit probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. When she saw me, her lips curled into a sneer. She leaned over to her lawyer and whispered something. They both laughed. Her lawyer, Harrison Webb. The man had made a name for himself destroying opponents in corporate litigation. He'd won every major case in the past 5 years. His reputation was that of a shark, someone who showed no mercy. That's exactly why Vanessa had hired him. She wanted to humiliate me publicly, to prove I was nothing but a gold digger who'd manipulated her father. I walked past their table without looking at them. I could feel Vanessa's eyes boring into my back. Good. Let her feel confident. Let her think she'd already won. I set my briefcase down at the defendant's table. No lawyer sat beside me. I was representing myself, something that had caused quite a stir when I'd filed the paperwork. The judge hadn't arrived yet, so the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Journalists filled the gallery. This case had become quite the spectacle. Wealthy businessman dies, leaves everything to his wife, daughter sues claiming manipulation. The media loved it. Look at her. Vanessa's voice carried across the quiet courtroom, intentionally loud enough for everyone to hear. She didn't even hire a lawyer. She can't afford one now that daddy's money is frozen during the lawsuit. Her friends, sitting in the row behind her, giggled. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. My hands were steady. This is going to be easier than I thought, Vanessa continued, emboldened by my silence. She's just a housewife. What does she know about law? I wrote the date at the top of my legal pad. May 15th. Then I wrote Vanessa's name and underlined it twice. Harrison stood up and walked toward my table. He probably wanted to intimidate me before the proceedings began, a classic tactic. I'd seen it 1,000 times. I didn't look up from my notepad. Mrs. Preston, his voice was smooth, practiced. I'm obligated to inform you that you still have time to settle this matter outside of court. My client is willing to offer you a generous sum to walk away quietly. I clicked my pen. What? Twice. Still didn't look at him. $2 million, he said. That's more than fair for 12 years of marriage. You'd never have to work again. Now I did look up. Harrison was tall, probably 6'2", with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit. His watch alone could probably pay someone's rent for a year. He looked at me the way a lion looks at a wounded gazelle. No, I said simply. His smile thinned. I see. Well, I tried. Don't say I didn't give you a chance to make this easy on yourself. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd taken the offer. He turned to walk back to his table, and that's when I saw it. His briefcase. Brown leather, expensive, with his initials embossed in gold. J.W. Harrison James Webb. I remembered when he bought that briefcase 15 years ago, right after he'd won his first major case. Nice briefcase, I said quietly. He stopped mid-stride, turning back to me with a confused expression. What? Your briefcase. I remember when you bought it. After the Morrison case. You were so proud of that win. His face changed. The confidence flickered. He stared at me harder, really looking at me for the first time. His eyes widened slightly, then more. The color began to drain from his face. You defended Morrison against those fraud charges? I continued, my voice still calm. You used the precedent from Blackwell versus State Industries, the corporate veil argument. It was clever work. I remember thinking you'd finally understood what I'd been trying to teach you. The briefcase slipped from Harrison's hand. It hit the floor with a loud thud, papers spilling out across the tile. Every conversation in the courtroom stopped. Everyone stared. Harrison's mouth opened and closed. His hands trembled. Then, slowly, like a man in a dream, he bent forward in a bow. An actual bow, his head lowered, his body bent at the waist. Professor Brooks, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's really you. I can't believe it. We all thought you'd disappeared. The courtroom erupted. Journalists jumped to their feet. Vanessa's face went from smug to confused to pale in the span of 3 seconds. Her friends stopped giggling. Professor? Vanessa's voice was shrill. What is he talking about? I stood up slowly, walking around my table to where Harrison still stood bent over, his briefcase contents scattered at his feet. I looked down at the papers. Case files. All about me. Simone Preston, the housewife, the gold digger, the manipulator. Not a single mention of Professor Simone Brooks, former youngest legal scholar at Columbia Law School. "Hello, Harrison," I said gently. "You can stand up now." He straightened and I could see tears actually forming in his eyes. "I had no idea. If I'd known it was you, I never would have taken this case. Professor Brooks, please, you have to believe me." "What is happening?" Vanessa shrieked, standing up so fast her chair fell backward. "Who is Professor Brooks?" "Her name is Simone Preston. She's a housewife. She barely finished high school." The bailiff called for order, but the chaos had already spread. The journalists were on their phones, frantically typing or calling their editors. I could see the realization spreading through the room like wildfire. The judge's door opened and Judge Richard Thompson entered. "All rise," the bailiff called, and everyone scrambled to their feet. Judge Thompson was in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He took his seat and surveyed the chaotic courtroom with a frown. Then his eyes landed on me. He froze. "Order," he said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He was staring at me with the same shocked expression Harrison had worn. "Court is now in session for the case of Preston versus Preston." He cleared his throat, looking down at his papers, then back up at me. "Mrs. Preston, I see you're representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." Our eyes met. I saw the moment recognition fully dawned on him. His grip on his gavel tightened. "Professor Brooks," he said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. "My apologies. Mrs. Preston." Vanessa made a strangled sound. "You know her too? How does everyone know her?" "She's nobody. She's just a housewife who trapped my father." Judge Thompson's expression hardened as he looked at Vanessa. "Young lady, you will control yourself in my courtroom, or I will hold you in contempt." He turned back to me and I saw something in his face. Respect. Maybe even a hint of fear. "Mrs. Preston, or should I say Professor Brooks, it is an honor to have you in my courtroom. I studied your work on corporate law at Harvard. Your textbook was required reading." The remaining doubt in the room evaporated. Vanessa's face went from pale to green. Harrison had dropped into his chair, his head in his hands. "Your Honor," I said calmly, "if we could proceed with the trial, I have a case to defend." Judge Thompson nodded slowly. "Of course. Mr. Webb, are you ready to present your opening statement?" Harrison didn't move. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He'd built his entire career on being ruthless, on destroying people in court. Now he was sitting across from the woman who'd taught him everything he knew, and he was supposed to try to destroy her reputation. "Mr. Webb," the judge repeated more firmly. Harrison stood up shakily. "Your Honor, I request a recess. I need time to consult with my client." "Denied. You filed this lawsuit. You will proceed." Harrison looked at me, his eyes pleading. I gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness. Not permission. Just acknowledgement. He was about to go through with this, even knowing who I was, because Vanessa was paying him. Because his reputation demanded it. He cleared his throat and began his opening statement, but his voice lacked conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about manipulation. About a woman who saw an opportunity and took advantage of a vulnerable widower." I listened, taking notes, my face expressionless. But inside I was already 3 steps ahead. I taught Harrison every trick he knew. I knew exactly what he was going to do, and I knew exactly how to counter it. Vanessa kept glancing between Harrison and me, her confidence completely shattered. She thought she was bringing a housewife to court. Instead, she'd stumbled into a courtroom with a legend. As Harrison continued his opening statement, fumbling over words he'd probably rehearsed 100 times, I thought about the 12 years I'd spent invisible. 12 years of being dismissed, overlooked, treated like I was nothing more than someone's wife. 12 years of biting my tongue, of letting people underestimate me. Those 12 years were about to pay off in ways Vanessa couldn't possibly imagine. This wasn't going to be a trial. This was going to be a lesson. And by the time I was done, everyone in this courtroom would remember exactly who Professor Simone Brooks was, and why people used to say her name with respect. Vanessa wanted revenge for her inheritance. She was about to learn that revenge was a game best played by someone who knew all the rules. And I'd written the rule book. 12 years ago, I was someone else entirely. Professor Simone Brooks. The name carried weight in legal circles. At 32, I was the youngest tenured professor at Columbia Law School. My specialty was corporate litigation, and my textbook, The Modern Corporation, Legal Frameworks and Ethical Boundaries, was required reading at every top law school in the country. I didn't just teach law. I shaped it. My students went on to clerk for Supreme Court justices, to become partners at the most prestigious firms, to argue cases that changed industries. When I spoke at conferences, people listened. When I published papers, they became precedent. My office at Columbia was on the 7th floor, with windows overlooking the campus. I'd spent years making that space my own. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held volumes in multiple languages. My degrees hung on the wall. Bachelor's from Howard University, JD from Yale, PhD from Columbia. Each one represented years of work, of staying up until 3 in the morning, of choosing books over parties, research over relationships. I was good at what I did. More than good. I was exceptional. And I knew it. Professor Brooks, my assistant Patricia, knocked on my door one Thursday afternoon. She was a second-year law student, brilliant and efficient. Your 3 o'clock is here. I glanced at my calendar. Harrison Webb. A promising first-year student who'd requested a meeting to discuss his career path. I'd agreed because his work in my corporate structures class showed real potential. Send him in. Harrison entered nervously, clutching a notebook to his chest. He was 25, fresh out of undergrad, and clearly intimidated. Most students were when they met with me one-on-one. Sit. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat on the edge of the seat, his back straight. Thank you for meeting with me, Professor Brooks. I know you're busy. I'm always busy. That's why I don't waste time. What do you want to discuss? He took a breath. I want to be like you. I want to be the best. But I don't know how. You make it look easy, but I know it isn't. How did you get here? The question surprised me. Most students asked about grades, about internships, about networking. Harrison was asking something deeper. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. I got here by being smarter than everyone else in every room I entered. By working twice as hard as my peers. By never accepting no when I knew I was right. But how do you know when you're right? Research. Preparation. Understanding not just the law but the people who interpret it. Judges are human. Juries are human. The law is words on paper until someone applies it. If you want to win, you have to understand both the letter of the law and the spirit of it. I spent the next hour teaching him things I'd never put in a textbook. How to read a judge's body language. How to structure an argument for maximum impact. How to find the weakness in any case. Harrison absorbed everything like a sponge, taking notes frantically. Professor Brooks, he said as he was leaving, I hope someday I can be half as good as you. Then you'll need to work twice as hard as you think you do now. He nodded and left. I watched him go, already knowing he'd be successful. He had the hunger, the drive. In a decade, he'd probably be making millions at some firm. I turned back to my computer and the article I was writing for the Harvard Law Review. This was my life. This was who I was. Professor Simone Brooks, who needed nothing and no one. At least that's what I thought. 3 months later, Patricia knocked on my door again. Professor Brooks, there's a Mr. Gregory Preston here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. I frowned. The name meant nothing to me. Tell him to schedule through the proper channels. I tried. He says he'll wait. He's been sitting in the lobby for 2 hours. I sighed. Fine. Give me 5 minutes, then send him in. Gregory Preston entered my office exactly 5 minutes later. He was in his late 40s with dark brown skin, graying temples and kind eyes. He wore a blue suit that looked expensive but not showy. He had the bearing of someone successful but not arrogant. Professor Brooks? He extended his hand. Thank you for seeing me. I shook his hand briefly. You have 10 minutes? What do you need? He smiled at my directness. I need legal consultation on a business matter. My attorney referred me to you. He said you're the best in corporate law, particularly in merger ethics. I don't do private consultations. I'm an academic. I'll pay whatever your rate is. You couldn't afford my rate, Mr. Preston? And I'm not interested in private practice. Instead of being offended, he laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and unexpected. Fair enough. Can I at least explain my situation? Maybe you could refer me to someone who could help. Something about him made me pause. Maybe it was the laugh, so different from the usual corporate stiffness I encountered. Maybe it was the way he looked at me like I was a person and not just a brilliant mind to be exploited. You have 8 minutes left. He explained his situation. He owned a mid-sized manufacturing company that had been approached by a larger corporation wanting to merge. The offer looked good on paper, but something felt wrong. He'd read my work on corporate ethics and wanted my opinion on whether the merger would harm his employees. Most businessmen wouldn't have cared about the employees. They would have taken the money and run. Gregory cared. He spent his remaining minutes not talking about profits but about the 150 people who worked for him, many of whom had been with the company for decades. "Your 8 minutes are up," I said when he finished. "Here's my assessment. The merger would be profitable for you personally, but the larger corporation has a history of downsizing after acquisitions. Based on their patterns, you'd lose about 70% of your workforce within 2 years. His face fell. That's what I was afraid of. "However," I continued, "there's another option. If you restructure your company as an employee-owned cooperative, you make yourself unattractive for acquisition while securing your workers' futures. It's more work, less immediate profit for you, but it achieves your stated goals." His eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. How do I do that?" "You hire a corporate attorney who specializes in cooperative structures. I can give you 3 names." I wrote down the referrals and handed him the paper. He looked at it, then back at me. "Would you have dinner with me?" I blinked. "Excuse me? Dinner? To thank you for your time and insight." "That's not necessary. And I don't date clients. I'm not a client. You wouldn't take my money, remember?" He smiled again and something in my chest did an odd flip. "Mr. Preston?" "Gregory, please." "Gregory, I don't have time for dinner. I have a lecture to prepare, 3 papers to grade, and a book chapter due next week. Everyone has to eat. One dinner. If you hate it, I promise never to bother you again." I should have said no. I'd said no to countless dinner invitations over the years. My work was my life. Relationships were complications I didn't need. But something made me look at this man, this Gregory Preston who cared more about his employees than his profit margins, and say, "One dinner. This Friday. 7 o'clock. Choose somewhere quiet. I don't do loud restaurants." His smile could have lit up the entire city. That Friday dinner changed my life. We talked for 4 hours. He asked about my work, really asked, wanting to understand not just what I did but why I loved it. He told me about his late wife, who died of cancer 5 years earlier, and his daughter Vanessa, who was 14 and struggling with her mother's absence. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't name drop or brag. He was just real. Genuine in a way I wasn't used to in the academic world where everything was competition and ego. We had a second dinner. Then a third. Then coffee on Tuesday mornings became our routine. Gregory would come to campus, bringing pastries from the bakery near his office, and we'd sit in my office talking about everything and nothing. 6 months into knowing him, I realized I was in love. It terrified me. Love meant vulnerability. Love meant distraction. Love meant potentially giving up parts of myself. But when Gregory looked at me, he saw more than Professor Brooks. He saw Simone. The woman behind the degrees. The person I'd buried under achievement and ambition. "I love you," he told me on a Tuesday morning, snow falling outside my office window. "I love your mind, yes. But I also love the way you laugh at terrible jokes. The way you hum when you're reading. The way you bite your lip when you're thinking. I love all of you, Simone, not just the professor." I should have protected myself. Should have walked away before I got in too deep. Instead, I kissed him and whispered, "I love you too." We married a year later in a small ceremony. Vanessa was there, 15 years old, wearing a green dress and a forced smile. She'd made it clear she didn't like me, didn't want her father to remarry. I understood. She'd lost her mother. Now she had to share her father with a stranger. I tried with Vanessa. I really did. But I was 33, had never been a mother, had no idea how to connect with a grieving teenager who viewed me as the enemy. And then came the conversation that changed everything. It was 3 months after the wedding. Vanessa had gotten in trouble at school again, this time for skipping class. Gregory was at his wit's end. I found him sitting in his study, head in his hands. "She needs stability," he said. "She needs someone home when she gets back from school. Someone who can be present. Her mother was always there, and now..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood what he was saying. What he was asking without asking. I thought about my life. My career. My students. My research. Everything I'd built. Then I thought about this man I loved, and this broken girl who needed something I might be able to give if I tried hard enough. "I'll do it," I said quietly. "I'll step back from Columbia. I'll be home for Vanessa." Gregory's head snapped up. "Simone, no. I wasn't asking you to give up your career. That's not fair. I know you weren't asking. I'm offering. Vanessa needs consistency. You need support. And maybe..." I swallowed hard. "Maybe I need to be more than just my work." "Are you sure?" I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. 3 weeks later, I turned in my resignation to Columbia. My colleagues thought I was insane. Patricia actually cried. The dean tried to talk me out of it, offering reduced teaching loads, flexible schedules, anything to make me stay. But I'd made my choice. For the first time in my life, I was choosing something other than my career. I was choosing family. I was choosing love. I packed up my office. My degrees went into boxes and storage. My books filled the spare room in Gregory's house. My tailored suits were replaced with comfortable clothes suitable for a woman who'd be cooking dinner and helping with homework. Professor Simone Brooks disappeared. In her place was Simone Preston, wife and stepmother. A housewife. I told myself it was temporary. That I'd go back eventually. That this was just a break. But days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. And slowly the world forgot that Professor Simone Brooks had ever existed. The first 6 months of being a full-time stepmother and wife felt like learning a completely foreign language. I'd mastered corporate law, constitutional theory, and complex legal frameworks. But grocery shopping, meal planning, and understanding the emotional landscape of a teenage girl? That was its own kind of education. Vanessa made it clear from day one that she wanted nothing to do with me. She'd come home from school, grunt a hello if Gregory was watching, and disappear into her room. My attempts at conversation were met with one-word answers. My offers to help with homework were refused. She just needs time, Gregory assured me, pulling me close on the couch one evening. She's testing you. Seeing if you'll stick around. I'm not going anywhere, I said, and I meant it. But knowing I was committed and knowing how to connect were two different things. I'd spent years teaching brilliant minds at top universities. I had no idea how to reach a hurting 16-year-old. I tried cooking her favorite meals. She'd eat in silence, never commenting on whether she liked them. I tried asking about her day, her friends, her interests. She'd shrug and say fine before escaping back to her room. One night, 3 months into my new life, I found her crying in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. She froze when she saw me, wiping her eyes roughly. I couldn't sleep, she said defensively. I was just getting water. I nodded, moving to the kettle. I couldn't sleep either. Want some tea? She hesitated, then nodded slightly. We sat at the kitchen table in silence while the water boiled. I made chamomile for both of us, adding honey the way I liked it. Do you miss her? I asked quietly. Your mother? Vanessa's jaw tightened. Every single day. Tell me about her. Why? So you can try to be like her? No. Because she was important to you, which makes her important to me. Vanessa stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, she started talking. She told me about her mother's laugh, how she'd snort when something was really funny. About Saturday morning pancakes shaped like animals. About bedtime stories that her mother would act out with different voices for each character. She had cancer for 2 years, Vanessa said, her voice breaking. 2 years of hospitals and treatments and watching her get smaller and smaller. And then she was gone. Just gone. I'm not trying to replace her, I said gently. No one could. I'm just trying to be here for you in whatever way you need. Vanessa looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. You really gave up your job for us? Dad told me you were some kind of big deal professor. I was a professor, yes. Why would you do that? Give up everything? I thought about how to answer. Because sometimes the most important work isn't the kind that gets you recognition or accolades. Sometimes it's the quiet, everyday work of showing up for people you love. She didn't say anything else that night. But the next morning, she came down for breakfast and actually sat at the table instead of grabbing a granola bar and leaving. Morning, she said. It wasn't much. But it was a start. Over the next year, Vanessa and I found our rhythm. I learned she was passionate about photography, so I helped her set up a darkroom in the basement. She taught me about aperture and shutter speed, and I listened as she talked about capturing moments that mattered. We developed traditions. Sunday morning farmers market trips where we'd pick out fresh ingredients for the week. Wednesday night movie nights where Vanessa got to choose, even if it meant watching terrible teen comedies I didn't understand. Friday afternoon coffee dates where we'd sit in a cafe and she'd tell me about the drama at school. I didn't try to be her mother. I tried to be someone she could count on. Someone steady. Someone present. And slowly, Vanessa stopped seeing me as the enemy. She started seeing me as Simone. Just Simone, who was married to her dad and who genuinely cared about her. Meanwhile, Gregory's business was growing. He'd taken my advice about the cooperative structure, and it had paid off. His employees were invested literally and figuratively. The company's productivity increased. Morale improved. He was getting offers from bigger companies wanting to learn from his model. I need help, he told me one night after dinner. The legal paperwork for this expansion is overwhelming. I need someone who understands corporate structure, who can review these contracts and tell me what I'm agreeing to. I read through his documents that night, making notes in the margins the way I used to with student papers. I saw problems immediately. Clauses that would hurt him long-term. Provisions that benefited the other parties at his expense. Legal language that sounded good but created loopholes. "Don't sign this," I told him the next morning, handing back the contract covered in my annotations. "They're trying to box you into a corner. Here's what you should counter with instead." Gregory stared at the pages. "This is brilliant. How did you see all this?" "It's what I used to do. Analysis. Finding the weaknesses in legal arguments. Would you help me? Not just with this but going forward? I trust you more than any attorney I've hired." And so I did. I became Gregory's unofficial legal advisor, reviewing every major document, attending meetings as his wife but contributing insights that changed negotiation outcomes. I'd sit in his home office, surrounded by papers, feeling that old familiar thrill of dissecting complex legal problems. "You're so good at this," Gregory said one evening, watching me work through a particularly difficult merger proposal. "Don't you miss it? Teaching? Being Professor Brooks?" I looked up from the papers. Did I miss it? Sometimes. I missed the intellectual challenge of the classroom. Missed mentoring students. Missed the respect that came with my title. But I looked around at the life I'd built. At Vanessa's photography hanging on the walls. At the home we'd made together. At Gregory who looked at me with such love. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I'm happy here. With you. With Vanessa. This matters too. You could go back. We'd make it work. Vanessa's older now, more independent." I shook my head. "Maybe someday. But not now. Right now, this is where I want to be." And I meant it. I did. But there was a small part of me buried deep that wondered if I was being honest with myself. If I was truly happy or if I was just good at adapting, at making the best of choices I couldn't take back. The years passed. Vanessa graduated high school, then college. She moved to California to pursue photography professionally. She'd hug me goodbye at the airport, whispering, "Thank you for everything," before boarding her plane. Gregory and I settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long-married couple. We'd have breakfast together every morning, him reading the business section while I did the crossword. We'd take walks in the evening, talking about our days, making plans for the future. To the outside world, I was just Mrs. Preston, Gregory's wife. The woman who hosted dinner parties, who volunteered at charity events, who smiled and made small talk while others discussed business and politics. No one knew about my background. Gregory never told anyone, respecting my desire for privacy. And I never brought it up. Why would I? That part of my life was over. Professor Simone Brooks was gone, buried under years of domesticity. I was just Simone now. Just a housewife. I told myself I was fine with that. That I'd made peace with my choices. But sometimes, late at night when Gregory was asleep and the house was quiet, I'd go to the spare room where my boxes from Columbia sat in the corner. I'd pull out my degrees, run my fingers over the embossed letters. Professor Simone Brooks, Doctor of Juridical Science. That person felt like a stranger now. Someone I used to be in another lifetime. I'd put the degrees away and go back to bed, curling up next to Gregory, reminding myself that I'd chosen this. That love and family were worth the sacrifice. But sacrifice was the right word, wasn't it? I'd sacrificed my career, my identity, my reputation. All for this life. Was I happy? Yes. Most days genuinely happy. But was I fulfilled? That was a different question. One I didn't let myself ask too often, because the answer might have been too painful to hear. The next 8 years passed in a blur of ordinary moments that somehow added up to a life. I became the woman you'd never notice at the grocery store, the one who knew all the checkout clerks by name. I was the wife who attended Gregory's business dinners, making conversation about topics I could have written dissertations on but instead just nodded politely while others explained basic concepts to me. I remember one dinner party particularly well. Gregory had invited potential investors to the house, and I'd spent the day preparing. Roasted chicken with herbs from our garden, fresh bread, a salad with produce from the farmer's market. Everything perfect. The investors brought their wives, women in designer dresses who immediately clustered in our living room while the men talked business in Gregory's study. "So, Simone," one woman said, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "What do you do?" "I'm a homemaker," I said, offering wine refills. "Oh, how nice. It must be so relaxing not having to work." I smiled and said nothing. What could I say? That I'd written legal textbooks these women's husbands probably referenced in their contracts? That I'd taught at an Ivy League university while they were getting their Mrs. degrees? I could never just stay home, another wife said. I'd be so bored. I need the mental stimulation of my work. Simone keeps busy, Gregory said, entering the room with his guests. He put his arm around me. She's brilliant with business strategy. I run everything by her first. The wives smiled politely, but I could see the dismissal in their eyes. Of course the husband would say his wife was helpful. That's what loving husbands did. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation turned to a recent legal case that had made headlines. A corporate merger that had fallen apart due to ethical violations. It's fascinating, one of the investors said. The whole thing hinged on interpretation of precedent from some case in the 90s. Blackwell versus something. Blackwell versus State Industries, I said quietly, then caught myself. Everyone turned to look at me. You know the case? The investor asked, surprised. I read about it somewhere. The legal maneuvering was incredible. The attorney who won that case went on to teach at Columbia. Professor something. Brooks, I think? Brilliant legal mind. Too bad they disappeared from the field. My heart pounded. I took a sip of water, kept my face neutral. Maybe they had better things to do, I said lightly, standing to clear plates. In the kitchen, I gripped the edge of the sink, breathing slowly. That was my case. My victory. My name they couldn't quite remember while I stood there in an apron, invisible. Gregory found me there a few minutes later. You okay? Fine. Just tired. He pulled me close. Thank you for tonight. You're amazing, you know that. I hugged him back, trying to feel grateful instead of hollow. But the hollowness grew. Slowly, over years, like water wearing away stone. I was 44 years old, and my biggest accomplishment each day was whether I'd remembered to buy milk. Vanessa called every week from California. Her photography career was taking off. She'd landed a major exhibition, had photos published in national magazines. I'm so proud of you, I told her, and I meant it. I couldn't have done it without you, Simone. You gave me the confidence to pursue this. You showed me that someone could believe in me. Those calls were bright spots in increasingly gray days. I started volunteering at the local legal aid clinic, helping low-income families with housing disputes and contract issues. I didn't represent anyone, just advised behind the scenes. It was the closest I could get to practicing law without actually practicing. You're so good at this, the clinic director told me. Have you ever considered going to law school? You have a real gift. I smiled sadly. I'm too old to start over. You're never too old to use your gifts. But I was 45, then 46, then 47. My degrees were 12 years out of date. The legal field had moved on without me. And even if I wanted to go back, what firm would hire a middle-aged woman who'd been out of practice for over a decade? Then came Gregory's 50th birthday. We threw a party at the house, inviting everyone important in his life. Business partners, employees, friends from college. The house was full of laughter and music and celebration. Speech, someone called out, and everyone took up the chant. Gregory stood in the center of the living room, me at his side. I'm not good at speeches, he started. But I want to thank you all for being here. This company, this life, it's only possible because of the people who believed in me. He turned to me, taking my hand. Especially this woman. Simone, you gave up everything for us. Your career, your ambitions, your own dreams. You made Vanessa feel safe when she was broken. You helped build this business even though you never took credit. You're the foundation everything else stands on. Everyone applauded. I smiled and accepted hugs and compliments. But later that night, after everyone had gone and we were cleaning up, his words echoed. You gave up everything. Had I? Or had I given myself away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the shape of what others needed me to be? Gregory, I said, putting down the wine glasses I'd been collecting. Do you ever wonder what my life would have been like if we'd never met? He paused and wiping down the counter. Sometimes. You'd probably be dean of a law school somewhere. Writing more books. Shaping legal policy. He came over and took my hands. Do you regret it? No. Never. I love you. I love the life we built. But sometimes I wonder if I lost myself in building it. He pulled me close. You're not lost. You're right here. And you're still brilliant, still capable of anything. If you want to go back to teaching, to law, I'll support that. Vanessa's grown. You've given us 12 years. Maybe it's time to give some time back to yourself. I rested my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I don't know if I can. The field has changed. I've changed. I don't know if there's a place for me anymore. There's always a place for someone with your mind. But I wasn't sure he was right. The world had moved on. And I'd been standing still. 2 months later, Gregory collapsed at work. Heart attack. By the time the ambulance got him to the hospital, there was nothing they could do. He died holding my hand, his last words a whispered, "I love you." I was 51 years old and suddenly I was alone. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people came to pay respects. His employees, many of whom I knew by name from the company picnics I'd helped organize. Business associates who remembered me as the quiet wife in the background. Friends who'd never really known what to make of me. Vanessa flew in from California, devastated. We held each other and cried. My stepdaughter, who'd become truly my daughter over the years, was my only comfort in those dark days. A week after the funeral, Gregory's attorney, Mr. Patterson, called me to his office for the reading of the will. "It's straightforward," he said, opening the document. "Gregory left everything to you. The house, the business, his personal assets. Everything." I nodded numbly. I didn't care about money. I just wanted my husband back. "There is one caveat," Mr. Patterson continued. "He left a trust fund for Vanessa, already established years ago. She'll receive monthly disbursements for life. But the business itself, the company he built, that all goes to you." He was very clear about that. Why me? Why not Vanessa? It's his legacy. He told me once that you were the real architect of his success. That without your guidance, he'd never have achieved what he did. He wanted you to have it, to continue his vision. I left the attorney's office in a daze. Me in charge of a multi-million-dollar manufacturing company. Me who hadn't officially practiced law in 12 years. Me who the world saw as just a housewife. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd given up power to become invisible. Now in death, Gregory had given me more power than I'd ever had as Professor Brooks. I went home to our empty house. To the rooms full of memories. To the spare bedroom where my boxes from Columbia still sat, untouched for over a decade. I opened them. My degrees. My books. My old case files. Evidence of a life I'd lived before this one. Professor Simone Brooks stared back at me from an old faculty photo. She looked so confident. So sure of herself. So powerful. I'd been her once. Could I be her again? I was about to find out. Because 3 days later, I received a certified letter. Vanessa was suing me for the entire estate. The envelope was thick, official looking. Certified mail requiring my signature. The return address was from Whitmore, Harrison and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the state. I signed for it on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Gregory's funeral. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. Years of legal training had taught me to stay calm when faced with official documents. But nothing had prepared me for what I read. Petition for contest of will and fraud allegation. Plaintiff, Vanessa Christine Preston. Defendant, Simone Marie Preston. I sank into the kitchen chair, reading through the legal language. Vanessa was claiming that I had manipulated Gregory, used undue influence on an elderly man, isolated him from his daughter, and fraudulently convinced him to leave everything to me. The petition requested that the will be overturned and all assets transferred to Vanessa as the rightful heir. There were exhibits attached. Text messages between Gregory and me, taken out of context to sound manipulative. Photos of me at business meetings, framed as evidence I'd inserted myself into his company. Testimony from people I'd never met claiming I'd isolated Gregory from friends and family. It was all lies. But it was presented in a way that could be convincing to someone who didn't know the truth. My phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. I answered. "Hello. Did you get it?" Her voice was cold, nothing like the daughter I'd known for 12 years. "I did." "Vanessa, what is this? Why are you doing this?" "Why? Because you took everything from me. You took my father, you took 12 years that should have been just him and me, and now you're taking his legacy. You're nothing but a gold digger who saw an opportunity." "That's not true. I loved your father. I gave up my entire career to be there for you, to give you the stability you needed." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Your career? What career? You were a teacher at some college. Dad felt sorry for you, that's all. He told me once that you needed him more than he needed you. That you had nothing else in your life." The words cut deep because I knew Gregory had never said that. Vanessa was rewriting history, creating a narrative that fit her anger. "I was there for you," I said quietly. "When you had nightmares about your mother, who sat with you. When you needed help with college applications, who spent hours editing your essays. When you called crying about your first breakup, who talked you through it. You did what any decent person would do. That doesn't mean you deserve my father's empire." "Empire? Vanessa, it's a manufacturing company. And I helped build it. I reviewed every major contract, advised on every significant decision. Your father trusted my judgment. Because you manipulated him. You made yourself indispensable so he'd leave you everything. Well, I'm not going to let you get away with it. By the time my lawyer is done with you, everyone will know you for what you really are. A fraud. The line went dead. I sat in the silent kitchen, the lawsuit papers spread across the table. This was the daughter I'd loved? The girl I'd helped raise? How had we gotten here? But I knew. Grief did strange things to people. Vanessa had lost her mother at 14, and now she'd lost her father at 26. She needed someone to blame, something to fight against. And I was the easiest target. I read through the lawsuit again, this time with my professor's eye. It was competently written but had significant weaknesses. The evidence was circumstantial. The claims of manipulation would be hard to prove. Any decent attorney could poke holes in this. But then I saw the signature at the bottom of the filing. Harrison James Webb Esq. Harrison. My former student. One of the most successful corporate litigators in the state. He'd learned from me, built his career on strategies I'd taught him. And now he was going to use everything I'd taught him to try to destroy me. I should have felt angry. Should have felt betrayed. Instead, I felt something else entirely. A cold, clear certainty settling over me. Harrison didn't know who he was up against. Vanessa didn't know who she'd declared war on. To them, I was just Simone Preston, the housewife. The nobody who'd gotten lucky marrying a successful man. They'd forgotten or never known that before I was a housewife, I'd been something else entirely. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Patterson, Gregory's attorney. Mr. Patterson, it's Simone Preston. I need you to recommend a good litigation attorney. I've been served with a lawsuit. There was a pause. Mrs. Preston, I heard. Vanessa's action is unfortunate but not unexpected. Contested wills are common when significant assets are involved. I can recommend several excellent attorneys. That won't be necessary. I'm going to represent myself. Mrs. Preston, I don't think that's wise. This is a serious legal challenge. You need professional representation. I am a professional. Or I was. Do you have access to legal databases? Of course. Look up Professor Simone Brooks, Columbia Law School. Then call me back. I hung up. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. Mrs. Preston, or should I say Professor Brooks? I had no idea. Your credentials are extraordinary. You literally wrote the book on corporate law. I did. And now I'm going to use that knowledge to defend what's rightfully mine. If you're sure, I'll support you however I can. I'll provide all of Gregory's business records, documentation of your involvement in company decisions, anything you need. Thank you. I'll be in touch. I hung up and walked to the spare bedroom. To those boxes I hadn't opened in 12 years. I pulled out my degrees, my bar certifications, my publications. I spread them across the floor, taking inventory of who I used to be. Then I started making calls. Patricia? It's Simone Brooks. Yes, I know it's been years. I need a favor. Are you still connected to the legal academic community? Good. I need research access. Columbia Law Library? This is Professor Simone Brooks. I need to reactivate my alumni access to legal databases. State Bar Association? I need to confirm my bar status. License number. One by one, I activated parts of my old life that had been dormant for over a decade. My bar license was still active, I just hadn't renewed my practicing status. That could be fixed with paperwork. My academic credentials were untouchable, permanent. My reputation, though faded, was still there in legal circles. By the end of the day, I had everything I needed. Access to case law, legal precedents, court records. I had my old textbooks, now 13 years out of date but still fundamentally sound. I had my mind sharper than ever because I'd spent 12 years applying legal thinking to real-world business problems. And I had motivation. Not just to win, but to remind the world exactly who Professor Simone Brooks had been. And who Simone Preston could become. I set up my war room in Gregory's home office. I covered the walls with timeline charts, evidence lists, legal precedent citations. I reviewed every document in the lawsuit, making notes on every weakness, every opportunity, every angle of attack. Harrison was good. I trained him well. But he'd learned everything from me. I knew his strategies because I'd taught them to him. He'd anticipate standard legal responses because that's what I'd trained him to do. But I wasn't going to give him standard responses. I was going to give him something he'd never seen before. A master class from his old professor. A reminder of why people used to fear facing me in court. 3 days before the first hearing, I received another call. This time from Harrison himself. Mrs. Preston, this is Harrison Webb. I'm calling as a professional courtesy to discuss potential settlement. Mr. Webb. How nice to hear from you. There was a pause. Did he hear something in my voice? Some echo of the professor he used to know? My client is willing to be generous. We'll drop the fraud allegations if you agree to split the estate 60-40 in Vanessa's favor. You'd still walk away with millions. That's very generous. But no. Mrs. Preston, I don't think you understand the position you're in. My client has a strong case. Your lack of legal representation puts you at a severe disadvantage. This will become public, messy. Your reputation will be destroyed. My reputation as what, Mr. Webb? A housewife. I don't have a reputation to destroy. Exactly. Which is why you should settle. Take the money and move on. I think I'll take my chances in court instead. Mrs. Preston. See you at the hearing, Mr. Webb. I hung up and smiled for the first time since Gregory's death. Harrison had no idea what was waiting for him in that courtroom. In 3 days, Vanessa would learn that the woman she dismissed as just a housewife was about to become her worst nightmare. And Harrison would learn that you should never, ever underestimate your former professor. Especially when she's had 12 years to think about everything she taught you, and all the ways to counter it. The courthouse was cold, all marble and echoes. I'd been in hundreds of courtrooms in my career, but this felt different. Personal. I was fighting for my dead husband's legacy. Fighting against the stepdaughter I'd loved. Fighting to prove I was more than what the world had reduced me to. The preliminary hearing was set for 9 a.m. I arrived at 8:30, wearing a blue suit I'd had to buy specially for this occasion. My old professional wardrobe no longer fit. The woman I was now shaped differently by years of different routines. I'd spent the last 3 days preparing. Not just researching case law and organizing evidence, but something more important. I'd reached out to my past. Professor Brooks. Patricia met me in the courthouse lobby. She was in her 40s now, a successful attorney with her own practice. It's so good to see you. I still can't believe what's happening. Thank you for coming. Of course. When you called, I had to sit down. We all thought you just disappeared. Some people thought you died. In a way I did. Professor Brooks died. I became someone else. Patricia squeezed my hand. You're still brilliant. That doesn't just go away. And today you're going to remind everyone of that. We walked into the courtroom together. It was mostly empty, just a few court officials and journalists who'd caught wind that this might be an interesting case. Rich man's widow versus his daughter. The media loved that kind of drama. Then Vanessa entered with Harrison. Vanessa looked elegant in a black suit, her blonde hair styled perfectly. She looked like money, like power, like someone who deserved to inherit an empire. She didn't even glance at me as she took her seat. Harrison set his briefcase down, pulled out files, conferring with Vanessa in low tones. Professional. Prepared. Confident. I sat alone at my table, my single briefcase looking inadequate next to his stack of materials. I could feel people watching, judging. Poor widow trying to represent herself. This was going to be a slaughter. All rise. Judge Thompson entered, and the hearing began. He looked at both tables, his expression neutral. Did he recognize me yet? Probably not. It had been over a decade since he'd been in my classroom. This is a preliminary hearing for Preston versus Preston, he began. The plaintiff is contesting the will of Gregory Preston, claiming undue influence and fraud. Before we proceed to discovery, I want to understand the basis of these claims. Mr. Webb, you may present your argument. Harrison stood. He was polished, articulate. He laid out Vanessa's case with precision. How I'd isolated Gregory. How I'd insinuated myself into his business. How I'd manipulated a grieving widower into abandoning his daughter. The evidence will show, Harrison said, walking toward the bench, that Mrs. Preston engaged in a calculated campaign to position herself as indispensable to Gregory Preston. She had no prior business experience, yet suddenly she was reviewing contracts, attending meetings, making decisions. This isn't love. This is manipulation. He was good. I taught him well. He presented circumstantial evidence as fact, used emotional appeals to paint me as a villain. If I'd been watching this case as an observer, I might have been convinced. Thank you, Mr. Webb, Judge Thompson said. Mrs. Preston, you're representing yourself? Yes, Your Honor. Do you wish to respond to these allegations? I stood, smoothing my suit. Every eye in the courtroom was on me. The journalists leaned forward. Vanessa smirked. Harrison watched with barely concealed pity. "Your Honor, may I approach?" He nodded. I walked to the bench carrying a single folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit my credentials for the record. My bar license, my academic certifications, my publications in legal journals." I handed him the folder. He opened it and I watched his face change. Confusion, then shock, then something like awe. "Professor Brooks?" he said quietly. "Hello, Judge Thompson. It's been a long time." The courtroom erupted. Journalists started typing frantically. Vanessa turned pale. Harrison's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Order," Judge Thompson said, his voice sharp. The room fell silent. He looked at me, then at the credentials in front of him. "Mrs. Preston, these credentials, you're Professor Simone Brooks?" "I am. Or I was. I stepped away from academia 12 years ago to focus on my family." Harrison was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is... I don't understand. If Mrs. Preston has these qualifications, why wasn't this disclosed?" "I had no obligation to disclose my educational background, Mr. Webb. My credentials don't change the facts of this case." But we all knew they did. The narrative Vanessa and Harrison had built depended on me being an uneducated housewife. A nobody who'd gotten lucky. The revelation that I held a PhD in law from Columbia, that I'd taught at an Ivy League university, that I'd literally written textbooks on corporate law, that changed everything. "Your Honor," I continued, "Mr. Webb claims I had no business experience. That's false. For 12 years, I served as an unofficial legal advisor to my husband's company. I reviewed every major contract. I advised on corporate structure. I helped navigate complex legal challenges. I wasn't just his wife. I was his most trusted counsel. I pulled out documents from my briefcase. Here are emails between my husband and his business partners discussing my legal insights. Here are contracts I personally reviewed with my notes in the margins, notes that Gregory then used in negotiations. Here are board meeting minutes where my recommendations are specifically cited." I laid them all on the judge's bench. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because I loved my husband and believed in his vision. But to claim I manipulated him, that I had no right to his trust, that requires ignoring 12 years of documented intellectual contribution to his success. Judge Thompson examined the documents. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the wheels turning. "Mr. Webb," he said finally, "did you know about Mrs. Preston's background when you took this case?" Harrison looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "No, Your Honor. I had no idea." "So you filed a lawsuit claiming your client's stepmother was an uneducated gold digger without actually researching her background?" "We researched. There was no public record of." "Because I chose privacy over publicity," I interrupted. "That doesn't mean my credentials don't exist. It just means Mr. Webb didn't look hard enough." The journalists were having a field day. This was better than they could have hoped for. Not just a will contest, but a dramatic reveal. Legal legend returns from obscurity to defend herself in court. Vanessa was whispering urgently to Harrison. He was shaking his head, looking shell-shocked. "Your Honor," I said, "I'd like to request that we proceed with this case. My stepdaughter believes I manipulated her father. Let's examine the evidence. Let's put everything in the light of day. I have nothing to hide." Judge Thompson looked at Harrison. "Mr. Webb, do you wish to withdraw your petition in light of this new information?" Harrison hesitated. He was trapped. If he withdrew, he'd look like he filed a frivolous lawsuit. If he proceeded, he'd be going up against the woman who taught him everything he knew about corporate litigation. We wish to proceed, Your Honor." "Very well. Discovery will begin immediately. I'm setting a trial date for 4 weeks from today. That should give both parties time to prepare." He looked at me. "Mrs. Preston, are you certain you don't want to retain counsel? This is a complex case." "I'm confident in my abilities, Your Honor." He nodded slowly. "I'm sure you are." Court is adjourned. As people filed out, I packed my briefcase. Harrison approached, his face pale. "Professor Brooks, I had no idea. If I'd known." "You would have what, Mr. Webb? Refused the case? Or just prepared better?" He had no answer for that. "You taught me everything I know," he said quietly. "I taught you well. Which is why this trial is going to be interesting. You've spent years using my strategies against other attorneys. Now you get to use them against me. Consider it your final exam." I walked past him, leaving him standing there. As I exited the courtroom, journalists swarmed. "Professor Brooks, why did you give up your career? Mrs. Preston, what do you say to allegations you're a gold digger? Will you be writing about this case in your next book? Patricia ran interference, helping me to my car. Once inside, I let out a long breath. That was incredible, Patricia said. Did you see their faces? I saw them. I started the car. But this is just the beginning. Harrison's going to fight back. He has to, or his reputation is ruined. And Vanessa. She's not going to give up just because I have a law degree. What's your next move? Research. Preparation. I need to be ready for every argument Harrison can make. And I need to find evidence that proves beyond doubt that Gregory wanted me to have the business. You'll win. I know you will. I wished I shared her confidence. Yes, I'd surprised everyone today. Yes, I'd changed the narrative. But the trial was still going to be brutal. Vanessa was going to put my entire marriage on display, questioning every moment, every decision, every action. And Harrison, for all his shock today, was still one of the best attorneys in the state. He'd recover from his surprise and come at me with everything he had. Over the next 4 weeks, I lived in Gregory's office. I read through every document, every email, every piece of correspondence from our 12 years together. I built a timeline of our relationship, documenting every major decision, every business triumph, every moment that showed our partnership. I also researched Harrison. I pulled every case he tried in the past decade, studying his tactics, his favorite arguments, his patterns. I knew how he thought because I'd shaped how he thought. But he'd also grown beyond my teaching. I needed to understand the lawyer he'd become, not just the student he'd been. Patricia visited weekly, bringing coffee and moral support. You're going to make legal history with this case. Professor Brooks versus her former student. The media is eating it up. I don't want fame. I just want to honor Gregory's wishes. And get revenge on Vanessa for betraying you? I didn't answer, but Patricia saw the truth in my face. She was your daughter in every way that mattered, Patricia said gently. This must hurt more than any legal battle. It does. But she made her choice. Now I have to live with mine. As the trial date approached, I felt something I hadn't felt in 12 years. Purpose. Not the quiet satisfaction of making a good meal or the joy of helping Vanessa with her homework. This was different. This was the sharp, clear focus of intellectual combat. The thrill of matching wits with a worthy opponent. I'd forgotten how much I missed this. The law. The challenge. The beautiful complexity of legal argument. Professor Brooks hadn't died 12 years ago. She'd just been sleeping. And now she was wide awake. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. News of the Housewife professor had spread, and everyone wanted to watch this battle play out. I recognized faces from my Columbia days, former colleagues and students who'd come to see if the legend was real. Journalists filled the back rows. Vanessa's friends occupied the seats behind her table. I sat alone at my table as I had at the preliminary hearing. But this time I wasn't isolated. Patricia sat in the front row behind me, along with 3 other former students who'd driven hours to support me. Their presence gave me strength. Judge Thompson entered and we rose. He surveyed the crowded room with a stern expression. This trial has attracted significant attention. I want to make clear that this is a courtroom, not a circus. Anyone who disrupts proceedings will be removed. Is that understood? Everyone nodded. Good. Let's begin. Mr. Webb, your opening statement. Harrison stood and I watched him transform. Gone was the shocked student from the preliminary hearing. This was Harrison Webb, master litigator, back in control. He'd had 4 weeks to prepare and he wasn't going to waste them. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, addressing the room despite there being no jury. This was a bench trial, but Harrison understood the power of performance. This case is about betrayal. About a woman who saw opportunity and seized it without regard for the damage she'd cause. He walked toward my table. Yes, Mrs. Preston has impressive credentials. She's highly educated, highly intelligent. But intelligence doesn't preclude manipulation. In fact, it makes it easier. Mrs. Preston knew exactly what she was doing when she convinced Gregory Preston to abandon his daughter emotionally and financially. I took notes, keeping my expression neutral. The evidence will show that from the moment Mrs. Preston entered Gregory Preston's life, she began isolating him. She convinced him to change his will, not once but 3 times, each time increasing her share and decreasing his daughter's inheritance. She positioned herself as indispensable to his business, ensuring he'd believe he couldn't function without her. And when he died, she walked away with everything. Harrison pulled up documents on the screen. Here's the original will, written 5 years before Gregory Preston met the defendant. He left everything to his daughter as any loving father would. Here's the will written 6 months after their marriage. Now the estate is split 50-50. Here's the will written 5 years ago. Now Mrs. Preston gets 75%. And finally, here's the last will written just 2 years before his death. Mrs. Preston gets everything. The progression looked damning. I'd known about the will changes, but seeing them displayed like this, anyone would question why a father would systematically cut his daughter out of his inheritance. Each change came after Mrs. Preston's influence increased, Harrison continued. After she inserted herself into the business. After she convinced Gregory Preston that his daughter didn't care about him. After years of subtle, systematic manipulation designed to ensure that when he died, she'd be the sole beneficiary. He turned back to Judge Thompson. Your Honor, intelligence isn't a defense against charges of manipulation. If anything, it's evidence of capacity. Mrs. Preston had the knowledge, the skill, and the motivation to manipulate Gregory Preston. And the evidence will show that's exactly what she did. He sat down. It was a strong opening. He'd reframed my credentials as a weapon rather than a defense. Smart. Mrs. Preston, your opening statement. I stood, taking a moment before I spoke. Let the silence build. Let everyone wonder what I was going to say. Your Honor, Mr. Webb has presented a narrative. A story about a manipulative woman and a helpless man. It's compelling. It's dramatic. It's also completely false. I walked to the center of the room. Gregory Preston was not a helpless victim. He was a brilliant businessman who built a successful company through hard work and smart decisions. To suggest that such a man could be manipulated into abandoning his daughter insults his memory and intelligence. I pulled up my own exhibits on the screen. Here's what Mr. Webb didn't show you. Between the first and second will changes, what happened? Gregory Preston's company nearly failed due to a bad merger deal. Who reviewed the contracts and found the legal loopholes that saved the company? I did. I showed emails, documents, board minutes. Between the second and third will changes, the company faced a lawsuit from a former partner. Who developed the legal strategy that won that case? I did. Click. Another exhibit. Between the third and fourth will changes, the company expanded into 3 new states. Who navigated the regulatory requirements, the licensing issues, the corporate structure complications? I did. I turned to face the room. Each will change corresponded with a major contribution I made to the company's success. Gregory Preston didn't change his will because I manipulated him. He changed it because I earned it. Because I helped build the empire that Mr. Webb's client now wants to claim despite contributing nothing to its creation. I walked toward Vanessa's table. She wouldn't look at me. Miss Preston claims to love her father, to deserve his legacy. But where was she during the crisis years? In California, pursuing her own dreams. Which is fine. Children should pursue their own paths. But you don't get to ignore your father's business for over a decade and then claim you deserve to inherit it simply because of your last name. I returned to my table, picking up a thick folder. This contains 12 years of documented work. Contracts I reviewed. Strategies I developed. Problems I solved. My marriage to Gregory Preston wasn't a gold-digging scheme. It was a partnership. And like any partnership, the contributions of both partners deserve recognition. I looked at Judge Thompson. Mr. Webb wants you to believe that intelligence equals manipulation. I want you to see that intelligence plus 12 years of dedicated work equals earning what you receive. Gregory Preston left me his company because I helped him build it. The evidence will prove that beyond any doubt. I sat down. The room was silent for a moment, then whispers broke out. Judge Thompson gavelled for order. We'll take a 15-minute recess, then Mr. Webb can call his first witness. During the break, Patricia brought me water. You were perfect. Clear, direct, powerful. He's going to come at me hard. He has to discredit my work, make it seem like Gregory was the real mind behind everything. Can he do that? He'll try. Court resumed, and Harrison called his first witness. A former business partner of Gregory's, a man named Thomas Wright. Mr. Wright, how long did you know Gregory Preston? 20 years. We went to college together. And did you witness his relationship with the defendant? Yes. I was at their wedding, at business dinners, at company events. What was your impression of their relationship? Thomas hesitated, and I saw guilt flash across his face. But he'd been called to testify, and Harrison had prepared him well. Gregory was devoted to Simone. Maybe too devoted. He used to bounce ideas off me, other partners. After he married her, he stopped. He'd say, Simone thinks this or, Simone suggested that. She was always there, always influencing him. Did this concern you? Yes. Gregory was brilliant on his own. He didn't need someone else making his decisions. Harrison showed documents. Here's an email from you to Gregory, expressing concern about a business decision. Gregory's response mentions consulting with Simone first. Does this reflect the pattern you observed? It does. He couldn't make a move without her approval. It was my turn to cross-examine. I stood slowly. Mr. Wright, you testified that Gregory Preston was brilliant on his own. Is that correct? Yes. And before he met me, he consulted with you and other partners on business decisions? Well, yes. That's good business practice. So seeking counsel from trusted advisors is good practice. But seeking counsel from a wife with a PhD in corporate law is manipulation. Is that your testimony? Thomas shifted in his seat. It's different. How is it different? Because you were his wife. You had other interests. What interests would those be? Financial interests. You'd benefit from his decisions. Mr. Wright, you own 15% of Gregory's company. You also had financial interests in his decisions, correct? That's different. How? He didn't have a good answer. I pulled up an exhibit. This is an email from Gregory to you, 3 years before he met me. He's asking your advice on a potential acquisition. You advised him to proceed. The acquisition failed and cost the company $2 million. Were you manipulating Gregory with that advice? No, I was giving my best counsel. Your best counsel that happened to be wrong and cost the company millions. Yet you remained his partner and advisor. But when I give counsel that helps save the company, that's manipulation. Can you explain that logic? It's not the same situation. It seems very similar to me. The only difference is that my advice was better than yours. Harrison objected, but the damage was done. I'd shown that seeking advice from knowledgeable people wasn't manipulation, it was smart business. And I'd suggested that maybe Thomas was bitter that Gregory had found a better advisor. The rest of the day followed similar patterns. Harrison called witnesses who testified about my influence over Gregory. I cross-examined them, revealing their own biases, their own stakes in the business, their own reasons for wanting me discredited. By day's end, I was exhausted but satisfied. I'd held my ground. More than that, I'd shown that Harrison's narrative was built on assumptions and bitterness, not facts. But we both knew the real battle was still to come. When Vanessa took the stand. When I'd have to question the daughter I'd loved about why she believed I'd manipulated her father. That would be the hardest part of this trial. Not the legal arguments. Not the evidence. But facing the personal betrayal and maintaining my composure through it. I drove home that night to an empty house. No Gregory to discuss the day with. No Vanessa to hug me and tell me everything would be okay. Just me and the ghost of a life I'd lived. But I wasn't alone. I had my purpose. I had my skills. I had my determination to see this through. Professor Simone Brooks was back in the courtroom where she belonged. And she wasn't going to lose. Day 3 of the trial. The courtroom felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in as we reached the critical moment. Today Vanessa would testify. Today I'd have to face the girl I'd raised and treat her like a hostile witness. Harrison called her to the stand. She wore a green suit, her hair pulled back. She looked young and vulnerable, exactly the image Harrison wanted to project. Grieving daughter, victimized by scheming stepmother. Miss Preston, Harrison began gently, thank you for your courage in testifying. I know this is difficult. It is, Vanessa said, her voice soft. But my father deserves justice. Tell us about your relationship with your father before he met the defendant. Vanessa's eyes welled with tears. It was wonderful. After my mother died, it was just the two of us. We were so close. He'd take me to breakfast every Sunday. We'd talk about everything. I was his whole world. And when he met Mrs. Preston, did that change? Completely. Suddenly she was always there. At first, I tried to be happy for him. He seemed happy. But then she moved in and everything changed. How so? She started taking over. Organizing his schedule, screening his calls, deciding what we'd do as a family. Dad and I couldn't have our Sunday breakfasts anymore because Simone had planned family activities. When I'd call to talk to him, she'd say he was busy. She cut me out of his life piece by piece. It hurt to hear her testimony, partly because some of it was true, seen through a distorted lens. Yes, I tried to create family routines. Yes, I'd encouraged Gregory to include me in activities that had previously been just him and Vanessa. But not to cut her out. To include everyone. Did you ever confront your father about this? I tried. But she was always there, always listening. The few times I got Dad alone, he'd defend her. Say I was being unfair, that I should give her a chance. But I saw what was happening. She was replacing me. Harrison showed photos on the screen. Gregory and Vanessa before I entered the picture. Laughing, close, clearly a tight family unit. Then photos after our marriage. Fewer pictures of just Gregory and Vanessa. More of all three of us, though in those photos, Vanessa's smile never quite reached her eyes. When did you learn about the will changes? Not until after Dad died. His attorney told me that Dad had left everything to Simone. I was shocked. Dad had always told me the company would be mine someday. That I was his legacy. Did your father ever explain why he changed his will? No. She made sure I never got the chance to ask him. And now he's gone, and I have no way to know if he really wanted this or if she convinced him. Harrison let that statement hang in the air. Then he said, "No further questions." Judge Thompson looked at me. Mrs. Preston, cross-examination. I stood slowly, gathering my thoughts. This was the moment that would define the trial. How I questioned Vanessa would show everyone who I really was. Too harsh and I'd look like a bully. Too soft and I'd lose credibility. Vanessa, I began using her first name intentionally. You testified that before I married your father, you and he were very close. Is that correct? Yes. You had Sunday breakfast together? Every week. I pulled up phone records. These are your cell phone records from the year before your father and I got married. In that 12-month period, how many times did you call your father? Vanessa frowned at the documents. I don't know exactly. I can tell you. 42 times. In an entire year. That's less than once a week. For someone you claim to have been so close to, why weren't you calling more often? I was busy. I was in college. You were. At USC, 3,000 miles away. Your father wanted you to go to school closer to home so you could see each other regularly. But you chose USC specifically because it was far from home. Isn't that true? I wanted to experience California. Of course. You were 18, establishing your independence. That's healthy and normal. But you can't claim you were cut out of your father's life when you were the one who chose to live across the country. I showed more exhibits. Here are your father's calendar entries for the 2 years after we married. Every time you came home to visit, he cleared his schedule. We both did. We'd plan activities, dinners, trips. We tried to make every visit special. You were always there. I lived there, Vanessa. Was my home. Where else would I be? She had no answer. You testified that I stopped you from having Sunday breakfast with your father. Is that accurate? You made us do family activities instead. Family activities that included you. Farmers markets where you'd take photographs. Movie nights with films you chose. Cooking together, trying new recipes. Were those activities painful for you? They weren't the same as what Dad and I had before. No, they weren't. Because you weren't a child anymore. You were a young adult and relationships evolve. Your father wanted to include both of us because he loved both of us. That's not manipulation. That's family. I moved to the photographs. You mentioned these photos. You're right that there are fewer pictures of just you and your father after our marriage. Do you know why? Because you pushed me out. No. Because you stopped coming home. These records show that in the 3 years before your father's death, you visited twice. Twice in 3 years, Vanessa. And both times your father begged you to stay longer. He called you every week. He sent you gifts. He was desperate to maintain your relationship. I could see tears forming in her eyes. He left me voice messages. Listen. I played a recording. Gregory's voice filled the courtroom. Hey, sweetheart. Haven't heard from you in a while. Just wanted to check in, see how the photography is going. I miss you. Call me when you get a chance. Love you. The date stamp showed it was 3 months before he died. There was no return call in the records. Your father loved you desperately, I said quietly. He talked about you all the time. He was so proud of your success in California. But you were building your own life, which is what parents want for their children. He understood that. He never blamed you for choosing your career over regular visits home. Vanessa was crying openly now. You don't understand. I do understand. You lost your mother at 14. Then your father remarried and it felt like you were losing him too. So you ran. You built a life 3,000 miles away where you didn't have to watch someone else take what you thought should be yours. But that's not my fault, Vanessa. And it's not your father's fault. It's just life. Harrison stood. Objection. The defendant is making speeches instead of asking questions. Sustained. Mrs. Preston, please limit yourself to questions. I nodded. Vanessa, did your father ever tell you that he didn't love you? No. Did he ever say he was disappointed in you? No. Did he ever say he was leaving you out of his will as punishment? No, but. Yes or no, please. No. Thank you. Now about the business. You testified that your father told you the company would be yours someday. When did he tell you this? When I was young. When Mom was still alive. And after your mother died, after the company grew significantly, after I began advising on legal matters, did he ever repeat that promise? She hesitated. Not in those exact words. Did he ever say anything about you inheriting the company? He said I'd always be taken care of. Taken care of, and inheriting the company, are different things. Did he ever specifically promise you the company after our marriage? No. Did you ever express interest in running the company? I had my own career. Photography. Which you love. Which your father supported completely. He never asked you to give up your dreams to take over his company, did he? No. Because he knew you didn't want it. He knew you built your own path. And he was proud of that. So when he left the company to me, someone who'd spent 12 years working to make it successful, he wasn't betraying you. He was being logical. He should have left me something. He did. Your trust fund pays you $5,000 a month for life. Is that correct? Yes. So you're not inheriting the company, but you're not disinherited. You're receiving ongoing support without the burden of running a business you never wanted to run. That sounds like a father who loved you and wanted to take care of you without forcing you into a role you wouldn't want. Vanessa wiped her eyes. You have everything. The house, the company, all of it. You get to keep the life you built, and I lost my father. I lost him too, I said gently. And I miss him every single day. But taking the business from me won't bring him back, Vanessa. It will just destroy what he built. Is that really what you want? She didn't answer. She just sat there crying, and I knew I'd broken through her narrative. She'd convinced herself I was the villain because it was easier than admitting she'd let her grief and resentment cloud her judgment. No further questions, I said. Harrison tried to repair the damage, but it was too late. Vanessa's testimony had backfired. Instead of showing a manipulative stepmother, it had shown a young woman lashing out because she couldn't handle her grief. Judge Thompson called for a recess. As people filed out, I sat at my table, trembling slightly. That had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Treating Vanessa like an opponent instead of family. Patricia brought me water. You did what you had to do. I know. But it doesn't make it easier. When court resumed, Harrison looked defeated. He called a few more witnesses trying to rebuild his case, but nothing stuck. Every person he called, I was able to show had their own biases or incomplete information. Finally, he rested his case. Mrs. Preston, Judge Thompson said. Your witnesses? I call myself to the stand, Your Honor. I swore in and took my seat. I'd represent myself and question myself, essentially making a statement directly to the judge. State your name and credentials for the record. Simone Marie Brooks Preston. Bachelor's degree in political science from Howard University. Juris Doctorate from Yale Law School. PhD in corporate law from Columbia University. Former tenured professor at Columbia Law School specializing in corporate litigation and ethics. Please describe your career before meeting Gregory Preston. I walked through my academic achievements. My published papers. My textbook that was still used in law schools. My students who'd gone on to clerk for Supreme Court justices and become partners at major firms. The cases I'd consulted on that had set legal precedent. Why did you leave academia? I fell in love. Gregory Preston was a widower with a teenage daughter who needed stability. I chose to give them that stability, knowing it would mean stepping back from my career. Did Mr. Preston ask you to give up your career? No. It was my choice. He would have supported either decision. Describe your contributions to Gregory Preston's company. And here I presented everything. Every contract I'd reviewed with my notes showing how I'd caught problems. Every legal strategy I'd developed. Every business decision where my input had made the difference between success and failure. I showed emails where Gregory thanked me for my insights. Board minutes where other partners acknowledged my contributions. Financial records showing the company's growth correlating with my involvement. Did you manipulate Gregory Preston? No. I loved him. I supported him. I used my expertise to help him succeed. But I never manipulated him. Did Gregory Preston change his will under your influence? He changed his will as his situation changed. Each change reflected the current state of his life and business. The final will reflected 12 years of my contributions to his company. He left me the business because I'd helped build it. He left Vanessa a trust fund because he loved her and wanted to ensure she'd always be comfortable. Both decisions were rational and fair. No further questions. Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to make me admit that I'd subtly influenced Gregory, that I'd positioned myself to be indispensable, that I'd deliberately taken over his business decisions. But I'd spent weeks preparing for this. For every question I had a document. For every accusation I had evidence of legitimate contribution. After 2 hours even Harrison looked tired. "No further questions," he said. "Any rebuttal witnesses?" Judge Thompson asked. "No, Your Honor." "Then we'll break for closing arguments tomorrow. This trial is adjourned." As the courtroom emptied, I remained seated. The battle was almost over. Tomorrow would determine whether I kept my husband's legacy or lost everything. Harrison approached my table. "Professor Brooks, that was masterful. You've proven why you were a legend. This isn't about my reputation, Harrison. It's about honoring Gregory's wishes." "I know. For what it's worth, I believe you. I believe you loved him and earned what he left you. But I have a client who believes differently, and I have to represent her interests." "I understand. See you tomorrow." He nodded and left. I gathered my materials slowly. Tomorrow I'd give my closing argument. Tomorrow Judge Thompson would decide. Tomorrow the world would remember exactly who Professor Simone Brooks was. The final day of trial felt different. The air in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Every seat was filled, journalists standing in the back when they ran out of chairs. This case had captured the public's imagination. The housewife who was secretly a legal genius. The stepdaughter who sued and underestimated her opponent. The student who faced his former professor in court. It was the kind of story that made headlines. I arrived early wearing a red suit this time. Bright, bold, confident. I'd spent all night preparing my closing argument, but I'd also spent time thinking about Vanessa. About the girl I'd loved. About how we'd reached this point. Grief did terrible things to people. I understood that. But understanding didn't mean I could let her win. Judge Thompson entered at exactly 9 a.m. "Mr. Webb, your closing argument." Harrison stood. He'd recovered his composure overnight. This was his last chance to salvage his case and he wasn't going to waste it. "Your Honor, this case has taken many turns. We've learned that Mrs. Preston is far more educated and capable than anyone initially knew. But I want to bring us back to the fundamental question. Did Gregory Preston freely choose to leave everything to his wife, or was he influenced by a woman who knew exactly how to make herself indispensable?" Harrison pulled up a timeline on the screen. "Look at the pattern. Mrs. Preston enters Gregory's life. Within months, she's advising on business decisions. Within a year, she's attending board meetings. Within 2 years, she's reviewing every major contract. And with each increase in her involvement, Gregory's will changes to benefit her more." He walked toward the bench. "Mrs. Preston's credentials are impressive. Her contributions to the business are real. But that's exactly what makes this case about manipulation. She had the knowledge and skills to make Gregory believe he needed her. She positioned herself as irreplaceable, and then received everything as her reward." Harrison showed emails between Gregory and his business partners. Here, Gregory asks Mrs. Preston's opinion before making a decision. Here, he delays a meeting until she can review the contracts. Here, he overrules his own partners because Mrs. Preston disagrees with their advice. This is a man who became dependent on his wife's counsel, perhaps unhealthily so. "But dependence isn't the same as manipulation," I interjected. Harrison glared at me. "Order," Judge Thompson said. "Mr. Webb, continue." "The question isn't whether Mrs. Preston contributed to the business. She clearly did. The question is whether Gregory Preston, had he been free from her influence, would have left everything to her and virtually nothing to his only child. I submit that no loving father would make that choice unless he'd been convinced his daughter didn't deserve his legacy." Harrison sat down. It was a strong closing, emphasizing emotional appeal over legal argument. He was trying to make Judge Thompson see me as a threat rather than a partner. "Mrs. Preston, your closing argument." I stood and walked to the center of the room. I didn't have a screen or exhibits. I just had my words. "Your Honor, Mr. Webb has asked you to imagine a version of Gregory Preston that didn't exist. A weak man, easily manipulated, unable to make his own decisions. But that wasn't Gregory Preston. Gregory was a brilliant businessman who built a successful company through intelligence and hard work. He didn't need me to tell him what to think. He needed a partner with legal expertise to help him navigate complex situations. There's a difference." I paced slowly. Mr. Webb shows emails where Gregory asked my opinion. He presents this as evidence of dependence. But seeking expert advice is what smart people do. When Gregory had a medical question, he called his doctor. When he had a legal question, he asked me. That's not manipulation. That's efficiency. I turned to face Judge Thompson directly. Let's talk about the will. Yes, it changed multiple times. But each change corresponded with major events in Gregory's life and business. The first change, splitting everything 50-50, came after I helped save his company from a disastrous merger. Was he wrong to reward that contribution? The second change, increasing my share to 75%, came after I developed the legal strategy that won a major lawsuit. Was he wrong to acknowledge that value? The final change, leaving me everything, came after 12 years of partnership where I'd proven myself indispensable, not through manipulation but through results. I pulled out a document. This is a letter Gregory wrote to his attorney 2 months before he died. He never sent it, but it was found in his files. With the court's permission, I'd like to read it. Judge Thompson nodded. I cleared my throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Dear Charles, I'm writing to explain my final will in case anyone ever questions it. I'm leaving my business to Simone because she built it as much as I did. Maybe more. Without her legal mind, I'd have made a dozen mistakes that could have destroyed everything. Without her strategic thinking, I'd have missed opportunities that made us millions. She never asked for recognition. She worked behind the scenes, letting me take credit, supporting me without needing applause. That's real partnership. That's real love. My voice cracked, but I continued. As for Vanessa, I love my daughter more than life itself. But she has her own path, her own career, her own dreams. She doesn't want this company. She never has. I'm giving her financial security through the trust fund, which is more than generous. But the company belongs to Simone. She earned it. If anyone questions this, tell them I was of sound mind and this was entirely my choice. Signed, Gregory Preston. The courtroom was silent. Even Harrison looked affected. Your Honor, that letter proves what this case is really about. Not manipulation. Not undue influence. Just a man trying to be fair to both the women he loved. He gave Vanessa financial security. He gave me the business I'd helped build. Both of us received what we'd earned. I walked back to my table, then turned for my final statement. Vanessa testified that I took her father from her. But the truth is she left. She chose California. She chose to visit twice in 3 years. She chose her career over regular contact with her father. Those were her choices, and they were valid choices for an adult building her own life. But she doesn't get to make those choices and then blame me for the distance that resulted. I looked at Vanessa. She was staring at her hands, tears falling. I never wanted to replace her mother. I never wanted to push her out. I just wanted to love her father and build a life with him. And when he died, he left me the company because I'd earned it. Not through manipulation. Through 12 years of dedication, hard work, and partnership. I turned back to Judge Thompson. Gregory Preston made a choice. He chose to reward contribution over biology. He chose to leave his legacy to the person who'd helped build it. That's his right as a free man making a free choice. To overturn his will would be to say that a man can't choose his own heir. That blood matters more than contribution. That's not justice. That's just tradition for tradition's sake. I took a breath. I ask you to honor Gregory Preston's wishes. To recognize that he knew what he was doing. To understand that intelligence and capability aren't evidence of manipulation, they're evidence of value. And to let me continue the work Gregory and I built together. I sat down. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. Judge Thompson looked at both tables. I'll render my decision after a brief recess. We stood as he left. The 15-minute break felt like hours. Patricia sat with me holding my hand. Former students surrounded my table, offering quiet support. Harrison sat with Vanessa, talking in low tones. She looked broken and part of me wanted to go to her. To comfort her like I used to. But I couldn't. Not now. Maybe not ever. Judge Thompson returned. Everyone stood until he sat. I've reviewed all the evidence presented in this case. I've considered the testimony, the documents, the exhibits. And I've reached a decision. My heart pounded. The burden of proof in this case rests with the plaintiff. Miss Preston must prove that her father was unduly influenced or manipulated into changing his will. After careful consideration, I find that burden has not been met. Vanessa gasped. Harrison's shoulders slumped. The evidence shows that Gregory Preston made informed, deliberate choices about his estate. Mrs. Preston's contributions to his business are well documented and significant. The letter written by Mr. Preston clearly states his reasoning and affirms his mental competence. While the will changes may seem unusual to outside observers, they reflect a rational response to Mrs. Preston's increasing value to the business. Judge Thompson looked at me. Mrs. Preston, or should I say Professor Brooks, your credentials and capabilities are extraordinary. But they're not evidence of manipulation. They're evidence of why Gregory Preston valued your counsel and chose to reward your contributions. He turned to Vanessa. Miss Preston, I understand your grief. Losing a parent is devastating, and it's natural to search for someone to blame. But the evidence doesn't support your claims against your stepmother. Your father loved you. He provided for you through the trust fund. But he also made a choice about his business legacy, and that choice was his to make. Judge Thompson picked up his gavel. The petition to contest the will is denied. All assets remain with Mrs. Simone Preston as specified in Gregory Preston's last will and testament. The plaintiff will pay all court costs. This case is closed. The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted. Journalists rushed for the doors. People were talking, shouting, congratulating me. Patricia hugged me tight. Former students surrounded me, celebrating. But I was looking at Vanessa. She sat at her table, crying, Harrison's hand on her shoulder. She looked up, our eyes met. In that moment I saw the girl I'd loved. The teenager who'd cried in my arms about her mother. The young woman I'd helped become who she was. Then she looked away and I knew. Whatever relationship we'd had was over. This trial had destroyed it completely. Harrison approached me as the crowd thinned. Congratulations, Professor Brooks. You've proven you haven't lost your edge. Thank you, Harrison. You fought well. Not well enough. You taught me everything I know, but you didn't teach me everything you know. I smiled sadly. A teacher's prerogative. He left to gather his things. I packed my briefcase slowly, savoring the moment. I'd won. Gregory's legacy was secure. The business would continue. Justice had been served. But as I walked out of the courthouse, past reporters shouting questions, past supporters congratulating me, I felt empty. I'd won the case. But I'd lost my daughter. And no legal victory could fill that void. 6 months after the trial, I stood in front of Columbia Law School's main building. The same building I'd walked out of 12 years ago, carrying boxes of my academic life. Now I was walking back in, but not as the same person. The dean had called me 3 weeks after the trial verdict. Professor Brooks, we'd like to offer you a position. Part-time if you prefer. Guest lecturer. Whatever works for you. We'd be honored to have you back. I'd thought about it for days. Did I want to return to academia? Did I want to be Professor Brooks again? Could I be? In the end I'd said yes. Not full-time. Not the demanding schedule I'd had before. But enough to feel like myself again. Like the woman I'd been before I'd chosen family over career. My first lecture was today. Corporate ethics and legal boundaries. 40 students sat in the auditorium, most of them probably having no idea who I was. But a few older students, those who'd researched the faculty, looked at me with something like awe. Good morning, I said, standing at the podium. I'm Professor Simone Brooks. Some of you may have heard of me. Most of you probably haven't. That's fine. Over the next semester you'll learn why corporate law matters, why ethics aren't optional, and why the decisions you make as attorneys will shape not just your careers but the world around you. I clicked to the first slide. A photo of a corporate merger gone wrong. Let's start with a case study. A company acquires another company, promising to preserve jobs and maintain operations. Within a year, 70% of the workforce is laid off. Was this legal? Yes. Was it ethical? That's what we're going to discuss. The semester had started, and it felt right. Like coming home after a long absence. But teaching wasn't my only project. I'd also established a foundation using a portion of Gregory's estate. The Gregory Preston Foundation for Women in Business. Its mission was to help women who'd left careers for family obligations return to the workforce. We offered legal consultations, resume building, networking opportunities, and retraining programs. We partnered with companies willing to hire women with gaps in their employment history. We provided childcare assistance and flexible scheduling. Too many brilliant women disappear from their fields because they choose family, I told the foundation's board at our first meeting. And when they want to return, they're told they're too old, too out of date, too risky to hire. We're going to change that. The foundation's first recipient was a woman named Rachel. She'd been a software engineer, left her career to care for her sick mother, and found herself unable to get interviews 5 years later despite her skills and experience. The gap in my resume is like a scarlet letter, she told me at our initial meeting. No one will even talk to me. Then we'll find companies who will. And we'll help you update your skills so that gap becomes irrelevant compared to what you can contribute now. 6 weeks later, Rachel had a job at a tech startup. She called me crying with gratitude. You gave me back my career. You gave me back my future. You did that yourself. I just opened some doors. But it felt good. Better than winning any case. I was using my resources and my experience to help women who'd made the same choice I had. Women who'd been told they were just housewives when they were so much more. The business I'd handed over to Gregory's former partner, a man named Jerome who'd always been fair to me. I remained on the board and consulted on major decisions, but I didn't want to run a manufacturing company. That had been Gregory's passion, not mine. My passion was law, teaching, helping others. Jerome sent me quarterly reports. The company was thriving. The employee ownership model was working beautifully. Gregory's vision lived on. I'd sold the house I'd shared with Gregory. Too many memories, too much emptiness. I bought a smaller place in the city, close to Columbia. A brownstone with a home office, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and space for the life I was building. My degrees were no longer in storage. They hung on my office wall where they belonged. Professor Simone Brooks had returned. But I wasn't the same woman I'd been 12 years ago. I was someone new. Someone shaped by loss and love, by sacrifice and vindication, by 12 years of being invisible and then demanding to be seen. I got a call one afternoon, 4 months after the trial. An unknown number. Hello? Simone? It's Vanessa. I froze. I hadn't heard from her since the trial. Hadn't expected to ever hear from her again. Vanessa. I want to apologize. I need to apologize. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Please just listen. I sat down, gripping the phone. I was wrong, Vanessa said, her voice thick with emotion. About everything. I was so angry after Dad died, and I blamed you because that was easier than dealing with my own guilt. I should have visited more. Should have called more. Should have been there for him. But I was building my life and telling myself he understood, and when he was gone, I couldn't handle the fact that I'd missed so much time with him. She took a shaky breath. You were there. You made him happy. You helped him build something incredible. And instead of being grateful that he had you, I convinced myself you'd stolen him from me. But you didn't steal him. I gave him up, piece by piece, and then blamed you for the space I'd left empty. I closed my eyes, tears forming. Vanessa. I destroyed our relationship. I said terrible things. I tried to take everything from you. And you still didn't say anything cruel about me in court. You could have. You could have painted me as a neglectful daughter. But you didn't. You just told the truth, and the truth was bad enough. You were grieving. That's not an excuse. I'm sorry, Simone. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to ever have what we had before. But I needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what you gave up for us, what you meant to Dad, and how wrong I was. I wiped my eyes. I forgive you. You shouldn't. I know. But I do. Because you were my daughter, Vanessa. You still are in my heart. And I understand grief. I understand how it can twist your thinking and make you do things you'd never normally do. She was crying openly now. I miss him so much. I miss him too. And I miss you. I miss Sunday farmers markets and Wednesday movie nights and Friday coffee talks. I miss having a mom. My heart broke and healed simultaneously. I'm here. If you want me. I can't replace what we had before. But maybe we can build something new. I'd like that. I don't deserve it, but I'd like that. We talked for another hour. About her photography, about my teaching, about the foundation. About Gregory and the good memories we'd shared. It was tentative, careful, but it was a start. Maybe someday we'd be close again. Maybe not. But at least we were talking. At least there was a possibility of healing. One evening, I was grading papers in my home office when my phone buzzed. Patricia had sent me an article link. Former housewife turned legal legend returns to reshape corporate law. I skimmed the article. It detailed my trial, my return to Columbia, the foundation I'd established. There were quotes from former students about my influence on their careers. There were testimonials from women the foundation had helped. The final paragraph read, Professor Simone Brooks spent 12 years invisible, dismissed as just a housewife. But her courtroom performance reminded the legal world why she was once considered one of the brightest minds in corporate law. Now, she's using her experience to help other women who chose family over career. In doing so, she's proving that time away from a profession doesn't diminish capability. It adds perspective. I closed my laptop and walked to my window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, women were making the same choice I'd made. Stepping away from careers to be present for family. Sacrificing ambitions for love. And then years later wondering if they'd made a mistake. I wanted them to know they hadn't. I wanted them to know that choosing family didn't mean choosing to be nobody. It meant choosing to be somebody different for a while. And when you were ready, you could choose to be yourself again. I thought about Gregory, about the life we'd built. I didn't regret those 12 years. They'd shaped me, taught me things I'd never have learned in a courtroom or classroom. They'd given me humility, perspective, and a deeper understanding of what really mattered. But I also didn't regret reclaiming my identity. Didn't regret standing up in that courtroom and reminding everyone who Professor Simone Brooks was. I was both women now. The brilliant academic and the devoted wife. The legal legend and the stepmother. The professor and the housewife. I was complete. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Patricia. Dinner tomorrow? I have a former student who wants to meet you. She's in a situation similar to yours was. Left her career, wants to come back. Thought you could help. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. Tell her to bring her resume. And her story. Everyone has a story worth hearing. Because that's what I'd learned through all of this. Every choice had value. Every path taught lessons. And no one was ever just anything. Not just a housewife. Not just a professor. Not just a widow or a stepmother or a legal legend. Just human. Just trying. Just growing. I walked back to my desk and pulled out my calendar. Tomorrow, teaching. Next week, a foundation board meeting. The following month, a speaking engagement at Harvard Law School. My days were full again. Full of purpose, full of passion, full of the work I loved. But they were also full of memories. Of Sunday mornings with Gregory. Of helping Vanessa with her homework. Of quiet evenings and simple joys. Both lives mattered. Both versions of me had value. And now, finally, I was honoring both. I picked up a framed photo on my desk. Gregory and me on our wedding day, smiling, in love, believing we had forever. Beside it, another photo. Vanessa at her first photography exhibition, me standing beside her, both of us proud. Thank you, I whispered to the photos, for teaching me who I could become. Then I turned back to my papers, to my students' work, to the life I was building. Professor Simone Brooks was back. But she was also Simone Preston. She was also just Simone. And all of those women were finally at peace with each other. Finally home. The end.